All right, welcome again to Social Distillation, the submarine still of the internet, where we attempt to drop the bead and pour white lightning straight onto your brain. What are we talking about today, Samo?
Well, this might be a little bit of a potpourri because we had teased talking about muscle spasms, which we could probably make political
Yes.
somehow. Uh, uh, I did watch a lot of the Libertarian National Convention over the weekend, which
Was a kind of spasm, like a spastic colon. Ugh.
no, I actually thought it was productive. I need to look more into the guy that they ultimately nominated. I like their VP pick. Clint Russell is very respectable, I think, to listen to, and his debate with Vivek was really good. Uh, then there was the Trump speech and the RFK speech there, and RFK was on Timcast at the convention for I think an hour and a half. Trump showed up for like 15 minutes. It was his was very curated. It was mostly his talking piece guy, and then he came in for about 15 minutes, and only Tim was allowed to ask him questions. So it was I thought that when they advertise live with Trump, and then that's what you get. It was very mainstream media to me, where
Mm-mm.
RFK sat down and took all the hard questions. And I think he landed blow for blow. I thought he did really good, especially since they were kind of respectful but hostile to him in their questioning a little bit. So we can go over that a little bit. Muscle spasms, that. Oh, and you sent me a thing that apparently I don't watch porn. I read it like a fucking lady. Uh
That was in reference to last time,
yeah.
actually, when we were talking about difference between men and women in our Wheel of Time talk. And I
Yeah.
had meant to bring that up as an example when I mentioned that, oh, boys in their locker room talk. Yeah, yeah, women do it too. It's just different.
Yeah, it is different. They do buy some of those romance novels. They're pretty saucy.
Hmm.
Uh, uh, a good source on that is one we bring up a lot is Modern Wisdom because he was a cover model for those romance novels
Oh, I didn't know that part of his
before he was
backstory.
on Love Island. Yeah, he was. That's kind of how he got his name out there to be on the show to begin with, as he would pose for his likeness to be on the cover of those things. So he's been onto all the conventions and talked to all the ladies, and it's so he's got some background information on that as well. But yeah, some of those get a little saucy, some of them get a little spicy. Uh, but we've oh, where did I see it? It was on Twitter. It was right after you sent that. I should have screenshotted it, but it's a guy who collected what he called the best advertisements in the last 20 years, and one of them was Pornhub. And it's got the wife walking up to the husband, but she's on the other side of the computer, and she goes, what are you looking at?" And he goes, "Nothing." And it says Pornhub, the biggest purveyor of nothing since da 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 da. I was like, yeah, that's pretty cool. That's funny. Uh,
Uh,
okay, so where do you want to start? Muscle spasms?
yeah, let's start with muscle spasms because I'm actually interested in this because I wasn't sure where you were going to go with it. And this is one of those things that I recall looking into a long while back when I first started studying physiology, anatomy, and biomechanics uh, before I actually got into training. And it was one of those things of, well, we're not sure. Probably we think, and there are different types, and so then it gets even more complicated. Uh, and it was
Yeah,
it
we're
was
not
one
going
of
to
those.
get that complicated.
Mhm.
Where this kind of came from was my final presentation for my biology of behavior class was in the neuroscience class was exactly it was dispelling the myth of mind over matter. It was
Mm.
our brains do everything. Our brain, nothing you do is not done without your brain. If you prick your finger, the signal goes to your brain, and then you pull your hand away, kind of thing. But that's not exactly true. And as I was doing kind of the research along this path, not only is it not exactly true, but sometimes it's actually better when the body does it itself versus the brain. So I came up with 5 examples of that in this because we needed 5 examples of our whatever our point was. But muscle spasms was probably one of the bigger, more robust versions of that. The other one, the one that's probably the most damning was actually hunger, the hunger signal.
Hmm.
So let me just bring this up. So this was from the PowerPoint here, and I'm not going to do it as a slideshow just so we can go through mood and discomfort. People have heard of this one. They've talked about judges that haven't eaten are more likely to have harsher sentences than the ones that
Hmm.
have just had lunch, that kind of thing. And so there's a little bit to that. And I hope everybody got my references as I went through. Most of them are from the 80s and 90s, but this one is a more recent one. Was the old Snickers commercials,
I
right? You're
like
not you when
those.
you're hungry. That was a great marketing campaign.
Who are the
But
chefs?
who are the chefs? But then the second one I brought up was your heart rhythm.
Hmm.
Your heart rhythm never goes to your brain, not
Huh,
your sinus rhythm. Now
really?
you do get acceleration or deceleration versus the sympathetic and parasympathetic response from fight or flight, but the actual sinus rhythm is located in your heart and it has its own pacemaker that keeps it going. So that was the second example I brought up. And you know, again, I was hoping people would get these.
That makes a baker's dozen.
That makes a baker's dozen. Then muscle spasms. So that was my third one, muscle spasms and cramps. And the technical term for what is happening there, the actual loop, is a persistent inward current. And it's really important because some things that we take for granted actually need to just be automatic. And the example I have here on the screen, if for those that are just listening, is posture, our postural
Ugh,
muscles,
yeah.
which is where we see most of our muscle spasms, isn't it? In our low back, our neck, all of those. Uh, but here's what it looks like when it actually happens. Do I need to blow that up or is it pretty easy to see?
Yeah, I think it works.
Yeah, so what I have on the screen is a motor unit, which is the part of this the nerve body that connects to all the muscle fibers that fire at once. So when we do strength training, what we're doing is we're actually synchronizing the motor units to all fire at once. Uh, and what happens with the muscle spasm is something happened that was wrong. And we're going to use the example of the low back. You're about to slip a disc. All right. So you're about to slip a disc because you're doing something that bulge is starting to form. Your body has to be able to respond posturally faster than the slip happens. So the muscle spasm actually saves you from hurting yourself more. The problem is we have this loop. It has to happen faster than your brain can think about, even signal going to your brain. So we have this little loop that causes that motor unit to just keep firing and firing and firing and firing and firing. The problem is because it never does go to your brain, you can't just say, okay, I'm safe now. I'm not in that position anymore. And so it keeps going until basically the muscle fatigues so much it can't spasm anymore. That's why it takes a few days for these to go away because you're constantly replenishing the energy and it's using it and eventually it uses more than you
Yeah.
replenish and you stop hurting. You can use a muscle relaxer to calm it down, which is basically sends a signal to 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 keep that from happening. But as you know from taking muscle relaxers before, that it's systemic. That's
Hmm.
not just to the muscle that you're
No,
trying to target,
that's gonna hit everything, which can cause problems.
which includes things like your colon, which is why you get constipation from those things. Uh, so you develop this internal loop that goes from your spine to the muscle to the spine to the muscle to the spine to the muscle, and your brain has nothing to do with it. Now, this was the part I had we'll get out of the PowerPoint there where I deviate because another bit of information, and this is I don't know if did I say it online that I'm this is kind of like a collective consciousness that I'm trying to develop here because I see the patterns, but I don't know what to do about it. And that takes a kind of an engineering type mind, which I don't have. So
Hmm.
that's one bit of information is you've got this internal loop that goes to your spine but then doesn't go anywhere else. It goes right back to the muscle, and then it's designed to make the process persist. to our benefit and to our detriment. The second bit of information, and I forgot to get a visual for this, but uh, people talk left brain, right brain, right? So your left side of your brain controls your right hand. The right side of your brain controls your left hand. And there's lots of great studies on this where they put something in the field of vision of one and you reach into a thing and you pull out, the one that corresponds with the field of vision, not with what you were told or whatever. So it's really the nerves cross on the motor control level. The nerves do not cross on the pain reception level.
Hmm.
And I wonder if that's the missing link to being able to pull yourself from a muscle spasm. The fact that there's a disconnect between actually which side of your brain is registering the pain and which side of your brain is controlling that system of skeletal muscle. So I don't know. There's got to be an adaptive purpose to it. I've thrown out kind of ideas in my head and talking at people that maybe we need a disconnect from the pain and the muscle action for survival reasons. Like if we're fighting a bear or something, you probably would want to be able to keep acting even though you just took a claw across the face or something. Uh, but I mean, that might be the disconnect that doesn't allow us to override that system. And that's the thing I wanted to throw out in the ether of the internet for maybe, wait, maybe that there is something to that and we could take an approach.
This actually, where is it? So this reminds me of something my dad had wanted me to look into for myself because step grandma did this and it finally helped her chronic pain. But she had a neck fusion surgery, but
Mhm.
then she continued to have chronic pain after that. And I
Yeah,
sent you
that
this
that that
video.
prevents further damage, but
Mhm.
the whatever is sensitized is still there.
So Mayo Clinic is is treating something what they call central sensitization syndrome. And I sent you this video, and my parents' 50th wedding anniversary was over the weekend, so we were up there for a surprise party, and I got to talk to grandma about this more about the process. And essentially, as she described it, is that the underlying theory is that when you are in chronic pain, you are creating more neuroreceptors in your brain associated with that
Hmm.
because it goes on so long. And so what you have to do is essentially retrain your brain to get rid of those. And that is what they focus on. And it's like a 3 week program that you're there, and then you go back home and you continue to work on these,
Yeah,
tools and techniques
and
for that.
this is probably one of those glitches in the system that again is something that's adaptable. So we know pain tolerance. Pain tolerance you build by feeling pain. But if the system glitches, you do exactly what you're talking about, where you become more sensitive to the pain.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the type of damage might be important because you're talking with her case was a neck fusion. It would be beneficial if we didn't, because so the neck fusion is modern technology. The adaptation is 100,000 years of being human without that modern technology. So it would actually be beneficial to feel more pain in that area so you don't move it as much because that would be protective. You would be sensitized to the pain so you don't do further damage. But the glitch is, well, we can fix it. We can fuse it. We have the technology. And so now we've got to do the reprogramming of the brain that, yes, was a good thing, just like the muscle spasm saved your back. But the the sensitivity of the pain saves you from further damage. Well, it's like an allergy now. It's no longer there. It's something that you're feeling threatened by, but doesn't exist anymore. And the wiring is exactly that. We again, this is the mind over matter thing. We want to say we can just think ourselves into anything, A little more complicated than that because it
Well,
depends on which synapses are connecting to which ones and which neurotransmitters are doing, which ones are,
exactly, and that's
yeah.
why now we've said this before, and is a good time to reiterate. Oh, it's all in your head. Just because it's all in your head doesn't mean it's not real,
Hmm.
right?
Pain is still
So,
pain. Pain, everything, pain, all pain is in your head.
mhm,
All pain is in your head. All everything. Of course, I just made the case that not everything is in your head, but the perception of it is. Everything you perceive is all in your head.
mhm. And your perception is your reality. And so if you are having to live with uh I'm she said before she went to this, she was only able to be out of bed when she was awake 1 or 2 hours a day
Hmm.
because everything just hurt.
Yeah, and this is so we can bring in fibromyalgia because remember the big debate was
That was
are
what I was
the
trying to think of.
are
Yeah.
these people actually feeling pain or are they just perceiving pain? And so then it was the it's all in your head thing, and doctors were dismissing it.
Yes.
But there is something to it because it's considered an autoimmune disease, more common in women, which have more autoimmune disease than men, and it's got an inflammatory property to it. And if you really think about it, it's like a generalized pain throughout the connective tissue. Well, if you have oxidative damage to the connective tissue, it's actually beneficial to not contract that very hard because it would be like taking a dry rotted cloth and pulling on it. You're more likely to rip it than the nice, fresh from the textile company cloth, right? So if you have more brittle connective tissue, it's probably beneficial to get a pain signal so you don't contract it too hard. Now that there's the okay, maybe we can put an identity on this. The part that sucks is it's still there. What do
Hmm.
we do about it, right?
Hmm.
Is there something we can do to fix that tissue? Do we want to get rid of that pain signal? That's the other part of my
Yes.
question is, do we want to get rid of the pain signal because pain is telling you something?
Do we try and figure out how to get rid of the pain signal? Like that's what I do with the radio frequency ablations along my cervical is because those facets are agitating those nerves and they need to be burnt down.
And
Or
so yeah,
okay.
this is
Or
I was
but
gonna
there
not go on with this, but this actually might be beneficial. So
mhm.
keep going, but I'm bringing up the
You know,
PowerPoint again.
or but okay, so that seems to be the best way to deal with that pain, that particular pain. But there may be instances where, okay, well, actually, what you need to do is to learn how to live with it in the same way that, okay, you have this structural defect, you know, basically, I've lost the curve in the whole upper half of my spine. All right. And I don't know if there's any way to ever get that back, but
Well, you can correct the opposite of it, which is
mhm.
the hunchback. So I'm assuming that over time you could correct
So do we work on
I
correcting that or do we work on living with it and not letting it get worse, right?
mhm.
So that's one of my frustrations with all of the physical therapy that I've done over the years, which is a lot. And it's really frustrating when you get someone who is of the textbook mindset of, well, what physical therapy is for is to rehabilitate, damaged muscles and let you regain your range of motion. Well, hold on a second. This is why I like McGill so much. Just right at the beginning of that book you gave me, and he talks about this of, well, hold on a second. No, that full range of motion may not be good for this individual.
Mhm.
So, he uses the example of a yoga teacher and he told this woman, look, you need to realize that you might not be able to do the things you want to do because that's aggravating your low back problems. So what it, we can get your posture right, we can get, things balanced out so you're no longer feeling that lumbar pain, but then if you go back to doing these certain kinds of movements, it's going to come back. So you may not be able to ever do those again, and you're going to have to work around that and live with that.
Yeah, the role of PT is to get you back to what you need to be doing. And for most people, that's just daily life stuff.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Now, if that yoga instructor has to do the yoga, then the role of PT should be trying to get her back to that. She just has to make the cost benefit analysis of doing the yoga
Yeah.
versus not doing the yoga. Same with a professional athlete. If someone wants to add a couple years to their career, but their shoulder is shot, the goal of the PT is to get them to where they can throw a ball again for another 2 years.
Hmm.
And then we'll deal with it after that. But for most people, it's something that's debilitating, which means you can't even do normal human activities. And that's
Yes.
why PT is so boring. That's why I didn't want to go into it because you're like throwing, you know, toothpicks on the floor and making them pick it up. And come on, we got better uses of our time. But the other subject. So this is where, again, should we fix it? Neural inhibition was my fourth example, and if we go down to that, it looks eerily similar.
Mm-hmm.
It's that loop from the motor unit to the spine and back to the motor unit. And in this case, it's not it's kind of the opposite of a muscle spasm. What it does is it turns off the motor units so you can't contract at full force. And the picture I had before that was the kid holding up the car looking like, but we all heard the stories of Granny picking up the car to save the kid.
Hmm.
The So Granny picking up the card, what they don't tell you about that is my next slide there where we are overriding the system. Adrenaline, on bottom left there, using smelling salts so you can lift more, but then you pop every tendon in your body. Right?
Is that O.J. Simpson from The Naked Gun? Is that
Yes.
okay?
Again, I was hoping people would get the references. I since there was one other older person in the class, and then other than that, we've got 20 years on everybody else. I don't know. But so this is a positive part of that same loop, right? So if we do something that fixes the muscle spasm, do we also do something that turns this off? That's the big question. And I would hope not. Oh, hunger. Yeah, we'll get back to that because hunger is fun.
Hmm.
Uh, but yeah, so can this be fixed with that knowledge? And the other question is, do we want to fix it with that knowledge?
I have a good example, a good illustration of this because we've talked about this before, and I actually meant to. I don't remember when it was where my stupid internet died when you were talking about the copperhead in the terrarium, which is just terrifying to me.
It
Um,
was terrifying, yes.
but the closest I have ever come to getting snake bit was several years back. We were at Grandpa's uh, lake house on Lake Eufaula, which is right in the middle of eastern Oklahoma on I-40, and it's pretty snaky. Even there where he's at, which is in this cove that is, I want to say it's like 2/3 retirement community and 1/3, second home lake house people. So there are enough people there year round that it feels more like a suburb, and you would think that would keep the critters away, but no, there's just too much habitat, and there's a lot of moccasins and copperheads there.
Yeah, well, and in some cases, if there's even more intense suburb or urban area around it, it pushes the wildlife to those
Yes.
areas. Yeah.
Yeah. So, me and the wife were walking along this this driveway that goes over this rough kind of uh natural dam that they put a roadway on to get to a house over here, and we're walking along going back to the house, and she suddenly screams and hops back. Thanks for the warning, honey. I don't know if I did this instinctively or if part of me saw this, but I froze and looked back at her to ask what was wrong. And she said, ah, and pointed. Again, thanks for the warning, honey. My foot is literally hovering about 2 feet above a water moccasin.
Mm.
Now, luckily, the reason it was on the road is because the neighbors got in late the night before and they must have run it over because it clearly had a broken back and a flattened out spot on it. Otherwise, I would have been snake bit.
Mm.
Now, the interesting thing that I didn't realize until after the fact when I was thinking about it is as I was turning around, I hopped back before I consciously saw the snake.
Hmm.
So I must have saw it in my peripheral vision as I was turning and then hopped back. and said, "Holy smokes." Um, and then it went and that was, oh yeah, that is definitely not a water snake. That is definitely a water moccasin, because it luckily, like I said, it had its back broken, so it couldn't rear up, but it did pull its head back and open wide in a threatening posture, and there's the milky white mouth and the two big fangs. Okay, so there's an illustration of what you're talking about, and why it's there. Okay, because if uh if I had not been able to react, first the freezing and then the hopping backward, then I would have been snake bit, even with its back broken. It would have got me if I would have made that step. Um, there is a similar example from back when I was a kid on conditioning. And this is where I think the snake examples are so useful, because the conditioning is also important. Um, because we grew up that if mama yelled at you, you stopped. All right. So we're at Canyon Lake and we're walking along, and it had been a sunny morning, but now it was getting overcast and cool because it was like late spring, early summer, South Texas. And we're walking towards this stone wall, and mom yells out at one of my sisters, "Stop right there." And she froze. And good thing, because if she would have taken two steps more, she would have been face to face with a moccasin that was curled up on the top of that wall trying to sun itself.
Okay, so yes, there is an explanation for this.
Mm-hmm.
So on the left, for those that can see, is the path from your eye to your visual cortex, which is in the back of your brain, of all things. But so the very front all the way to the back, and then it goes up with the dorsal stream there, which you can see is part of your cerebrum, your posterior cortex there. So now we're getting into the vision, going through the thalamus to the visual cortex, and then going to the thinking part of your brains. But for on the right side of this picture, for those that can't see, that same thing gets interrupted there in the thalamus, because it also sends, before it goes back to the visual cortex, it sends the signal to things like your amygdala and your insula. And insula would be disgust. Your amygdala would be your fear response. So I always say, if you take a hit to the back of the head and lose your vision, but you all of a sudden get scared, you're seeing something dangerous. Okay. So the step back, there's a snake. So you actually probably did react by seeing without seeing.
Mm-hmm.
The art of seeing without seeing. It's so there is a separate pathway there, and it's faster than your visual cortex, because your visual cortex has to decode everything, send it to the parts of your brain that actually have memories of these things, and then create an image from it. Which is actually an interesting phenomenon, because some people have trouble, they can't visualize things. So like if you say picture an apple in your head, they've got nothing. It just won't. I mean, there's different degrees of this. There's a spectrum of this, but for they've got nothing. And brain scans show that the part of your brain that is your phenomenal consciousness, which has a lot to do with your memory and making sense of the world, doesn't work properly. So so yeah, so you need both, and both together form the greater picture, including the emotional response to the thing you're seeing, which when we see snake, we go, ah, scared, because we're hardwired to do so. So it's really cool in that way. What? All right. So let me just wrap this up. I might want to do let me go through hunger, since we got all the way to the end anyways. So this hunger is really cool uh because it's, I think, the best example of the body knowing best. So you have two pathways in your body where a hormone called ghrelin is created. And one is the stomach, the cells in the stomach itself will create it, and it goes up to your hypothalamus and tells you you're hungry, and you go find food. The other one is the hypothalamus itself produces the hormone, and then you get hungry and you go find food. The problem is the signal can come from on high, this kind of on high. Uh, and you see this sign, which is modern abstraction of finding food, and you get hungry. For those that are again are just listening, it's a Taco Bell sign. All right. So if the hormone is produced directly in your brain, you get the wrong signal. If the hormone is produced by your body, you actually are hungry and needing sustenance.
I've said before, but yeah, this to me is the most beneficial part of doing intermittent fasting was learning to tell the difference.
Hmm. So usually the body is right instead of the other way around, excepting in the case of muscle spasms and allergies. Muscle spasms and allergies are the one annoying thing about that, but my fear is in trying to correct those, we could mess up the other ones.
Hmm.
And for those that need scientific sources, there you are with a bunch of pictures of my dogs. So I hope that helped me get an A. All right. I did get an A. I gained 2/10 of a point from having the high grade in the class, which is actually good because not just that I did well, but I actually took intellectual risks in the final. And I did that knowing it could cost me points. So it was, I guess, well received in doing so. So I was able to keep my intellectual honesty and still get a good grade in the class, which is the thing that worried me about going back to school.
When I did that, it was the one class for my major, the one history class I got a C in. That's
It
because it was
well,
Dr. Cooper and he was an asshole.
well, and I did have a negative in my other masters, a negative experience with that because we were supposed to do a like an 18-week program or whatever for peak performance. And I went and found the latest literature on a lot of these topics and included a lot of that in there. Turns out Dr. Gene Coleman, the old school, longest tenure strength coach in baseball, so he can basically say whatever he wants. Uh, and people, he is one of the most knowledgeable people, but he was a little bit old school. And I included a lot of new literature and red marks galore, and it dropped me a letter grade. That was the only B I got in that master's program. And it turns out all of the stuff I included that got marked off, not all of it, but the grand majority of it is what people are doing now because it was correct. And I did my due diligence. I never did get that grade corrected. But I can look back at that. I can make that statement that I stayed intellectually honest in the process. So, and it's actually what got me ahead in my career because I was up to date with the newest stuff, or more along the lines of getting rid of the bullshit we've been doing for a long time. And I think that was where he was too ingrained in his way of thinking to trim the fat of the way we've always done it versus this kind of new, which really exploded with the internet age, this new kind of wave of thinking of training. But yeah, so you said you could segue this into politics. Let's do it.
So, um, oh, for crying out loud, that was the wrong thing. Where did you go? Um, this is uh okay, here we go. The I'm trying to think of how to not to go off on too much of a tangent here, but one of the things I have criticized the right for from the right is not explaining, not teaching. Okay. Uh and even the grand poobah of the right, Rush Limbaugh, got this wrong, even though he was the one who pointed this out. And this was late 90s, early 2000s. I think when I was hearing him say this on his show, is that the problem Republicans had after the 94 contract with America, biggest swing in House and Senate seats ever in an off year election, is too many, both in the GOP, both within the party itself and within the conservative, movement, both people like him who were pundits and people who just considered themselves part of the movement, is that they thought that meant they had won. In much the same way that after the end of the Cold War, you had this idea, and I just brain farted on the guy's name, but there was a very influential and best-selling book called The End of History, where this idea came about that, oh, so we've won. The problem has been solved. The tension between uh
The world has
lowercase
agreed we're the city on the hill. Yeah.
exactly the
Yeah.
difference between lowercase classical liberalism and authoritarianism, that tension, that debate has been solved. Statism and liberty has won. No, it didn't. It's just that particular and egregious iteration of statist authoritarianism has finally fallen. The idea is not ever going away because people are still going to be people. And that was a great failing uh, culturally of the West. And then on a slightly smaller scale, the same thing happened with the conservative movement in America is, oh, well, we've won and now we can just be on cruise control.
Well, I think that's actually the failing of the authoritarian bending wings of either side. They they will have a win, and this is what I've complained about with DeSantis, and I've always been trying to, since we've had that little debate, that I was trying to think of a better way to say it. Speaking of explaining things, right? Is we had a big win, so we're just going to make the assumption that everybody wants everything we want. And the left is more egregious at it right now because they have most of the power. They've captured all the institutions, and they're even when there's a Republican statesman politician in charge, they have all the institutions, so they can still have their will be done no matter
Mm-hmm.
what. They own the media, they own schools, they own everything. Anything that has the word admin in it, they own. So it's more egregious right now, but you do see it. Okay, I had this big win. People love me. People love me for this. I am the darling. Oh, these other things that are my side, we're just going to make the assumption you want that too. And to your point, they never explain. They just
Mm-hmm.
do it. And that's the failure of both authoritarian bends on either side. Oh, well, you liked my abortion stance. I'm a lefty. You liked my abortion stance, and that got me into this place. But also socialized medicine, and it's like, no, we didn't like socialized medicine. We liked your abortion stance, or the other way around.
Mm-hmm.
We don't have to like everything about you, but you had this platform, and that's what we voted for. So do that thing.
DeSantis is a good example of this too, because when is he had his best? It's when he's sparring with the media
Hmm.
because he's forced to explain. Now
That I will concede. Yeah, yeah.
he's still better than, like, say, Ted Cruz was at giving a speech and explaining his position, explaining his reasoning. He's not as robotic, which if DeSantis isn't as robotic as Ted Cruz, that tells you a lot about Ted Cruz. So he is still better at that, but he's at his best when he's forced to explain the differences between the two sides
Well,
when
see, and
he's confronted by a confrontational media.
this is something that I wish Cruz would have gone further with, because during the COVID little era, that mini 2020, 2021, but really it was a response to his failure against Trump when he realized I wasn't connecting to people, which was his
Mm-hmm.
problem. He was at his best when he was partnered up with Michael Knowles, because Michael Knowles created the personality. He reached out to
It's a good
people.
point.
He is. I don't agree with probably 50% of his positions on things, but he explains it really well to me. That's why I can say I don't agree with you, because you just explained it so well to me that I can take a position here.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas politicians got really good at throwing out vagaries and one-liners, and you're like, I want to disagree with you, but I actually don't even know what you're talking about.
Well, and that's assuming that the politicians are actually trying to solve the problem or trying to solve a
Hmm.
problem rather than just grifting, which has been which is why there has always been a level of grift, corruption, selfishness, as opposed to self-interest in politics. I mean, you can go all the way back to Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, which was a movie from the 50s, right? And it's just been accelerating for the past several decades in large part because we're on cruise control, because we don't take our citizenship very seriously. And the way this ties in is because essentially what we were talking about there at the beginning was, as we've said before, we don't like nature versus nurture because the answer is yes.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what we're talking about here, is that there is an element of nature when it comes to politics, political ideology, philosophy, this kind of things. There's going to be an innate, I don't like this, or I like that, or this isn't fair, or what have you, but why? Okay, that's where the nurture comes in. I don't remember who I first heard say this, but it made me go oof, because uh children don't learn by osmosis. And I understood what the person was saying, and at the time it made me go oof, because I felt, you know, uh called out by that. But
Osmosis would be a better description of it than what people think children learn by, but okay.
but but actually they kind of do, especially early on in their really early formative years. They're just looking and listening and copying.
Well, it's even deeper than that. So let's use language as an example. The reason why your first language will always be your best language is not just the age you learn it at, but how you learn it. It is an immersion versus a learning the grammatical setup of this and how to make the baby goos and ga's, right? They goo, 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 the nonsense noises. And your reaction to the sounds they make determine what sounds they continue to make. So they say da, goo 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 da 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 da, and dad goes, he said da 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 da, and they see excitement on your face, so they start to say da 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 da, and then they connect it to the person who got most excited. And they say, mom, 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 mom. And mom's like, yeah, mom. Her first word is mom, mom, mom. And they get excited and they connect ma, ma, ma to that thing. And that's how they learn language. They make nonsense sounds and then keep doing it when you react well and you give them positive reinforcement. And then they basically don't do any of the sounds that didn't get a reaction out of you until they are talking. That's why it's going to be the most natural thing for them, because it is more like osmosis than it is a structured system. You're not going to sit down with a baby and say, okay, A, B, C, D. We do that later, but they already speak the language when we do that. We just add culture to the language by grammar.
Mhm. um
Sorry. Side note there, but yeah.
no, but that illustrates where I was going. And it's so, as an example of building off of that. So the example I came up with was this, because um yet again, one of the guys I used to like a lot, and he's been annoying me lately, Razorfist, the Rageaholic channel, as his latest video was about how Batman is quote unquote retarded. Or specifically, his not killing anyone is retarded. And it's a 20-minute long video, and I was like, I listened to the first several minutes, and I gotta check out here, because that's not the problem with it. The problem is it's elementary. And that people then try and use that of, see, you don't need a gun. Okay, well, yeah, if you're a billionaire in the top 0.5% of physical ability, sure, you don't need a gun. You can take out the bad guys, with your fists and your gadgets. Shut up. Stop being a moron. The the point of like, not just Batman, but like, this is the other thing that made me scratch my head and go, wait a minute, isn't your favorite superhero Daredevil? He does the same thing, right? Like,
Yeah.
even
Yeah.
one of the best Daredevil comics is when Bullseye kills Elektra, and Daredevil loses
Yeah,
it
that's a
and
good
comes
one.
this close to killing Bullseye and stops himself
My
because I'm the
favorite
good guy.
Daredevil comic was something to the extent that I'm trying to remember from childhood because all of these got destroyed by a dumbass stepdad. But my favorite Daredevil comic was labeled something to the extent of Daredevil's Bad Day. And he's just trying to go to work, and all of these bad guys keep making his day horrible. He walks out the door and he gets busted in the back by some I think somebody named Bullet or something. He's a big giant bull of a guy and knocks him over, and that's how his day starts. And it just keeps going and going and going and going all day. And I'm like, oh, that's like real life. That
Well,
reminds me of real life.
that's the point I'm getting to is okay, what are comic books and why do kids like them and why do even parents like kids liking them? Well, because they're teaching you simple moral lessons with
Hmm.
simple attractive storytelling. The Spider-Man is a very inspirational and aspirational character for a young boy. Okay? And so this is where this analogy kind of popped into my head of when you have a toddler, you just tell them, don't hit, don't bite, because they're going to. And you tell them, no, don't do that. Okay. As they get older, then you tell them, don't fight. As they start to understand more, it becomes more than just don't hit, don't bite, don't fight, don't get in a fight. And then as they get older, don't start a fight. Then as they get older, look, I don't want you to go starting fights, but if somebody is bound and determined to fight with you, you can defend yourself, right? This is my dad had to have this conversation with me when I was getting bullied in Hawaii and I didn't know why I was getting bullied. Turned out it's because I was a white kid, but that's another story.
No,
Um,
that doesn't happen. You're too
no, that doesn't
privileged.
happen. And he had to have this talk
Then you
with
weren't
me
being
because
bullied. You were just
yeah,
they were fighting oppression. So you should actually
exactly.
thank them.
I should just sit and take it. And
Mm.
I thought, Sunday school kid, no, fighting is bad, violence is bad. Look, and then son, no, don't start a fight. But if somebody's bound and determined to fight you, you can and should defend yourself. So there are these steps along the way of as they get older, as they become capable of understanding deeper, you start to explain why. It's no longer it's not from toddler through high school you just say don't hit. That's why we've ranted about zero tolerance fight policies. When we were kids, if you got in a fight on the playground, it was okay, who started it?
Hmm.
Or who started it or how did this start? What happened here, because punishment needs to be doled out accordingly. Punishment needs to be doled out appropriately.
I was, this was like the tail end of when this was even a thing, but I got licks in the principal's office one time. For those that don't know what licks are, they have a paddle in the principal's office and they were allowed to have corporal punishment. And the corporal punishment was doled out because I got into a fight with another kid. And basically, they were like, who started this? And we were like, we both wanted to fight each other. And so we both got licks, and me and the other kid ended up being friends after that because we took our punishment and we had our fight and we forgot why we were fighting.
Because you're males, but we're not
Yes,
allowed to say that.
but because we both stood up and took the punishment together, it actually became a bonding moment between two people that were just fighting. And it was, I don't know, I didn't have the most normal childhood either, so I don't know.
Mhm.
You could speak to the more suburban childhood, the military brat. Uh,
So this is how this ties in to what political you wanted to talk about, which is the Libertarian Party convention. This is why the
which is
Libertarian
a
Party
shit
is a
show,
crap
by the
show.
way. It's a
Yeah.
shit show. Yeah.
Why? And this is, you said I was pestering you last night about what are we going to talk about, or do I just need to piss you off and let you rant? And you said, oh, you can't piss me off, and I like challenge accepted. So I was going to the Libertarian Party is a shit show and it's all Richard Dawkins' fault. Um,
You
but
think that's gonna be the like your magic bullet to piss me off? All it does is just make me go, okay, how is he connecting this? Because I know it's gonna be wrong. That's all. It doesn't piss me
it's not
off.
wrong. It's a stretch because
It's a
it's not.
stretch.
It's
Okay, by the way, if you want great Richard Dawkins, everybody, he has a conversation with Brian Greene, who you know from Modern Wisdom. He was the
mhm,
physicist
mhm.
that we listened to together when you were down here one time. And that was a fantastic hour and a half conversation between the two of them. And what people don't get about Richard Dawkins is he's actually super funny too.
Mhm.
And that's part of the charm of it all. And Green is actually more funny. In fact, this what makes me mad with physicists because who's the face you think of when you think of modern physicists? The diversity hire, Neil deGrasse Tyson.
I was about to say Neil deGrasse Tyson, although he's an astronomer, which isn't exactly the same thing,
But
but yeah.
he is the face of everything Hubble. He is the face of everything
Mhm.
NASA and da 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 da. It should be Brian Greene. This guy's freaking hilarious. He's got a personality and he can spitball the most complex issues. He just
Mhm.
recently calculated how large of an object would be made if you took every human that ever existed on Earth and took out the space between the electrons and the protons. And it's the size of a baseball.
Wow.
That's how much space we are. We're all airheads. Uh,
Yeah.
so
Speaking of airheads, back to the
yeah,
libertarians.
back to the libertarians.
Um,
Okay, yeah.
so this connects back to my rant several weeks ago about Dawkins and his lamenting that, well, I don't want to lose our churches. I don't want to, lose Christmas time.
He expounds on that in that conversation,
I,
by the
I
way.
I
Yeah.
I know, but the reason I respect, and I said this then, the reason I respect Sapolsky so much more than Dawkins is because Sapolsky recognizes that you can't have that he's the oddball. As he said in that clip we way early on, the clip you showed where he pointed out, you know,
95% of people have some
yeah,
religious belief. It's you shouldn't be thinking about why they believe what they believe. You should be thinking about why the 5% like me don't.
exactly.
Is
Is
I think I got that pretty close to word for
yeah,
word.
it
Yeah.
is basically he paraphrasing him, and this is why, I also appreciate his personality, and he's much more personable when it
Well,
comes
also
to this
somebody who's
topic.
hilarious on a complex
Yes,
topic. Yeah.
is he basically said, I'm the oddball here. He was being kind of self-deprecating of, I'm the oddball here. Um, so I'm, don't go pointing fingers at everyone else. That's the way humans are. That's the way we have, most people for most of human history have been like that. The problem I have with Dawkins is actually a problem I have with us culturally, which is that we have not been explaining, we have not been teaching subsequent generations why that doesn't work, why you can't have a secular Christian nation and still have the same nation. See, so the problem with libertarians, especially as you start to get farther along towards the anarcho capitalist side of the libertarians, is that they don't or won't understand what John Adams said. John Adams said, and I don't remember if this was in his memoirs or if this was quoted somewhere else, but it's actually on the John Adams Society website, so you can verify this quote, that the Constitution was made for a moral and religious people. It it cannot govern any other. Or what was it? It is wholly inadequate to the government of any other. Why? So so the problem with the right is they'll just point that they'll cite that and then say go to church. That no, that's not enough. That doesn't work. You're not going to convince anyone with that. You have to explain to them why. And one of the annoying things that anarcho-capitalists like to do is say the social compact, the social contract. I didn't sign anything. You freaking idiot. That's not what Locke and Montesquieu and the other Enlightenment philosophers who came up with this concept, that's not what they meant.
Well, you do
Okay.
sign on to it every time you use the benefit of your citizenship.
No, it's more granular than that. You
I think
sign
that's
on
pretty
to it.
granular
No,
because
no,
you've
no.
been doing it since you were a child.
You sign on to it anytime you interact with anyone in your community,
Hmm.
because that's what the social compact is. See,
Yeah,
the
the old I can
problem
swing my fist until it meets somebody's
exactly.
face. Yeah.
The problem with libertarianism is that libertarianism is an end, not a means. Because when you boil down libertarianism, it is you go your way and you live your life, and I'll go my way and I'll live my life, and we'll leave each other alone. That cannot work.
Because we're socially dependent society. As we've talked about with Neanderthals versus Homo sapiens probably survived because we were more social than the
Mm-hmm.
Neanderthal. And so Yeah,
But
so if I am dependent on you in some way, then I have to provide something to you in some way, which is capitalism in a nutshell, right? But which is such a large society that the anarcho-capitalist version of that, of just laissez-faire, live and let live in every way, shape, or form, doesn't work because we're too, I mean, you would have to be just libertarian in its nutshell version, in its base version, which they don't even agree on what it is, actually only works in tribal society. And even then, it's very, very difficult to make work because you still have hierarchies that form.
and that's where I was getting, see, because what you're touching on there is the practicality of their argument, and that's why I like to annoy anarcho-capitalists by pointing out that their ideal is every bit as utopian as the other end of the spectrum, which is
Hmm.
communism.
Hmm.
Because what you are espousing is a utopia, which it means impossible. And it is impossible because what you are espousing can only work if you change human nature. Going back to something you brought up earlier, which was that the authoritarian bent of either side of the aisle, we bend towards authoritarianism individually, culturally, ideologically. And what protects us from that is that moral society that John Adams was talking about. Libertarianism is an end if you have the means, which is a moral and religious people. We were very libertarian when our nation was founded because we were a very moral and religious people. And so if you said, I'll go my way, you'll go yours, and we'll live and let live, you could reliably rely on that person to do just that, to actually live and let live.
See, and
If
and
you
I,
are
I
not
don't.
a moral society, then that other person is going to be sitting there going, no, you shouldn't live like that, and I can make you do the right thing. I can force you to do the right thing.
Well, and I take a different take on the founding fathers than you have, and actually, a lot of people I've been following have been taken because they're like, oh, well, we have to admit we're a Christian society. The idea of the founding fathers was, I think they were trying to, even though they may have had Christian influence on this, we're trying to create a secular, okay, these are the minimum standard requirements for pro-social behavior. And as long as we acknowledge that part of the social contract, then we can build from there. You can take a secular approach, but you also have to have an agreement of values. There's a difference there. Where the values come from can be your own, but that they're the base nature of those values is a cooperation amongst many people who have different basis for their values, who have different lives, who have different personality types, who have all of these different ethnic backgrounds. You know, we we have the my case for nationalism is the fact that we're so diverse in every other way. We got to have a common thing that brings us together. And there, at the base of that can be a set of values that we call American. And those are going to be typical Western values because that's the base makeup of where we came from, the
Uh,
Enlightenment, all of
uh-huh.
these things. So,
I would say yes and no, and the yes is that what
well,
they
okay, so let
recognized.
me piggyback on Sapolsky
Okay.
there. And you tell me if I'm too off base of what you're saying is what a lot of people seem to need is that underlying source of the value for it to have enough weight for them to have to follow along, basically, to do the right thing when no one's looking. Where there are some people, and this is where I talk with the Sapolsky people, when maybe we are the oddballs, but some people can see the value of that moral code without having to attach something, an unseen force that enforces the law. Because actually benefit from the interaction with people. These pro-social things are better for our thriving. And so so my yes is there are some people that need that, or they will never do the right thing when no one's looking. So we need a source of value that is always someone watching you. But there's a large group of people, and I bet you it's larger than the cohort that exists now, that can say, you know what, I will put the shopping cart back, even though no one can see me right now,
Hmm.
because it's the right thing to do. So that's my yes and no. The sad thing is there's more people that need the
The
the ever present thought of being watched to actually do the right thing. That's the problem here.
parsing this further and going back to the founding fathers, one of the many egregious lies of the 1619 Project is that it places the founding of the country in 1619 in Virginia. No, the ideological founding of the country was the Mayflower Compact.
Mm-hmm.
And we used to teach that in school, and we don't anymore because that's too religious. But the religion is important because if you actually look at the Mayflower Compact, these were incredibly religious people who had literally fled persecution. They had
And
members.
there's
So
another reason it's not being taught now, too, because it doesn't fit the agenda of
yes,
colonialism.
yes,
Because you have a group of people that were just like, hey, we're refugees from this other place. Can we
yes.
stay here?
They
And
they
it just so happens they happen to have smallpox with them. And everybody's like, oh, we purposefully killed these people with smallpox. It's like, no, I had this disease that I didn't know existed because I apparently was immune to it because I lived in a city. And all of a sudden, everybody I talked to gets sick. And it took us about 20 years to figure out what was going on.
mhm,
But the nature of those people wasn't to colonize. They were just like, oh, good, finally land. Let's stay
mhm.
here. And then there were people there and they're like, we've encroached on your land. Can we coexist? Maybe. And that's like the
Well,
whole thing behind Thanksgiving and all of that,
yeah.
because they did figure out a way to do it. And
Well, and actually, it was most of those tribes had been killed off by earlier contact with traders.
mhm.
And that is one of the ways and reasons that the Pilgrims were able to stay where they landed, which wasn't what the place they were aiming for, because these tribes that they met and became friendly with told them, yes, there used to be two other tribes here, and they have been completely wiped out by illness.
Yeah, most of the
So,
indigenous people that were wiped out, like what was it, 80 or 90% was due to smallpox.
mhm.
And it wasn't biological warfare because there was no intent behind it.
There
It
couldn't have
was
been
just
because they had no idea how this happened.
we had a bunch of people that came from cities, and when you live in a city, your immune system is more
Mhm.
robust because you're around a lot of people all the time from a very young age, out to a place where people didn't have contact with as many people of the same uh had it been the other way, had there been something in the United States, what was the before the United States area, North America, that had made the rounds and became a part of society at that point, so the people who were left were the people who were robust to it, and then the new people came and got that disease and died,
It would have been the
nobody would be
inverse.
talking
Yeah.
about it. Yeah, it would
Yeah.
have been the inverse. And then that was as equally, it was not equally probable because cities just are disease havens in themselves. But that could have been the case. And we would it might have even been the case that we don't know about scores of people who died of a mystery disease
Hmm.
because there was just so many immigrants that we had no tracking system for it until Ellis Island. So,
Yeah. So the point being, uh, that the reason the Mayflower Compact is important and the reason it's so insidious that it's not being studied, that it's not being taught in order to fit this narrative, is because this incredibly religious people who members of their own community had literally been burned at the stake. So they knew a thing or two about religious persecution. So they created a compact for governing themselves that was heavily based on and inspired by the Bible, but was also very secular to allow for freedom of conscience. and then societally, culturally, they would enforce these mores upon their families and their community through social pressure and social teaching. So what Adams is saying is that yes, the Constitution is a secular document, but it was heavily inspired by the Bible and religious teaching, and it won't work if you don't have culturally a moral and righteous and just society, or else it will devolve into what humanity is often devolved into, which is tribalism and might makes right.
Yeah, and this is where I stray from the Libertarian Party a little bit, but also I do have that bend to me, just that slight lean to me is I agree with you. We have to have some sort of moral code that is specific to our interactions with each other. But I also agree with the fact that it should be a minimum effective dose.
Legally, for sure.
Mhm.
Culturally, it needs to be more robust. But there's also an element of federalism to the cultural part, which is that
Well,
that
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 that was the antidote to the growth, right? Because when we started, we were just the 13 colonies. You can get away with a little bit more because everything's so intimate. Even the 13 colonies wasn't that big of a space of land.
mm-hmm,
And then as you're expanding out, you got the Louisiana purchase, you've got Texas coming in, you've got go west, my friend, right? You've got all of this. Well, we got really big really fast.
mm-hmm.
And the antidote to that was small mini governments everywhere that this
Yeah,
happens.
you can see the bigness just by looking at the western states. The western half of the United States, the states are freaking huge
Mhm.
compared to the eastern half. The states just kept getting bigger and bigger as they went along because there was just so much more land. And
Until you got to coast again, and then everything
mhm,
condensed again because you had ports form.
yes,
Yeah.
so to your point, you also see as you go west, it's not just a federalism of the territorial and then state government, but then you also have a communitarianism of each community is a little bit different. And you would see that more so. You still see it a little bit in very rural areas where there might only be one church. Everyone there would belong to that one church. They would have so they would thus have the same cultural values, and they would enforce that with cultural pressure rather than legal pressure, which is what we do now, which again, criticizing the right from the right, don't get too in high and mighty because let's remember prohibition came from the religious right.
Well,
Prohibition was
yeah.
religious authoritarianism.
Not only that is anytime you develop a system that has that kind of authority, so we'll talk about the police state, it it has that authority when it's not in your favor either.
Mm-hmm.
So we take COVID lockdown
that,
policies. The
that's another
police
element of what Adams
enforced
is talking
all of
about
these
is
bad things.
yeah,
Yeah.
is that not only do you need immoral people to make sure that if I say, all right, let's live and let live, that I'll actually abide by that and that you'll actually abide by that. But then you also need a moral society because the people who are going to enforce what laws you do have need to be relied upon to not take it too far. And again, that's where I go back to we've been on cruise control for way too long because we have allowed these these systems of law and order to become self-sustaining, self-perpetuating, self-interested rather than community, state, country interested. You know, again, go back to the FBI whistleblower on Timcast being told, "Yeah, well, your loyalty to the FBI comes before your oath to the frickin' Constitution." Are you kidding me? That is a wholly immoral stance. That person was espousing something that was immoral.
Yeah, and this is where the libertarians have an argument. But the problem is they have an argument because of the people who have gone too far. They don't have
Mm-hmm.
an argument on the general principle of the thing. And so, no, this was actually an overall positive experience because of the scope that it took on. So let me kind of give a review of it, because the major players that were there were obviously the libertarians themselves. They have their national convention. They choose their, and I do like this, and I wish the other parties would follow suit. Is the people at the convention choose the presidential candidate, but separately choose the vice presidential candidate. So the presidential candidate doesn't choose his vice president.
It's not a
They
single
choose
ticket.
both.
Yeah.
Now, I was kind of looking over while you were talking the platform of this Chase Oliver guy that they chose as their presidential candidate. He looks like another Gary Johnson, I guess, a gay Gary Johnson. So that, but he's too open border for me. And this has been a fight in there. There's open border and there's closed border in the Libertarian Party, and they argue it for the exact same reason. They just think the other extreme is the answer to the thing. And so that's been a fight between the Mises Caucus and this other guy is someone else. Clint Russell, who is the vice presidential candidate, he's actually a really sharp guy. I like him. I've heard him on several podcasts around as he was making the rounds, making his case. So so that was good. So those the key player there obviously is the convention itself. The other one, the first ever president, former president to speak at the Libertarian convention, Donald Trump, came out and gave a 35-ish minute speech. Uh, I thought it was okay. I'd give it a B. It not the best speech he's ever made, but it was pretty good. And he had a very specific message, which I thought was kind of smart, but not really out of his mouth. Because another key player was Vivek Ramaswamy, was there, gave about a 30-minute speech, exact same message, different tone. And he did it so much better than Trump did. And then he
Well,
debated Clint Russell.
I think he
Uh,
understands that audience a heck of a lot better than Trump does.
and I think he has more in common with that audience more than Trump does because he was the most libertarian Republican candidate on the in the primaries. Uh, and then RFK Jr. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. was there. And he gave about a 45-minute speech, which might have been his best speech he's given. So that's worth a watch, just watching his speech. So those are the big major players there. And Timcast had a live show there, and they had RFK on for about an hour and a half, and it was Tim, uh, Luke Rudkowski, which was great that he was on the panel. Phil Labonte and Hannah Claire Brimlaw. So she's the journalist. Phil's a heavy metal singer. Uh, Luke Rudkowski
Sure,
is
why not?
this is I actually like his work. I don't agree with him on a lot of things, but I like his work because he's the kind of journalist that will show up at a hotel to confront a politician as they're leaving their affair. He's that kind of journalist. That's
Mhm.
what he's the hard
I'm
nose,
I'm
get
not
him
here for
in.
the talking point. I want to ask a pointed question and get a real answer.
Yeah, and yeah, and he'll come out there. And so in that situation, which I think he's actually done, this person just made coitus with some random person that they shouldn't have been doing it with. And he'll ask them about their policy on immigration while he's not there to say, "Hey, who's that lady?" He just confronts him at that moment to say, "Oh, you voted yes on this bill for blah 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 blah. Give us your reason." And they're like, "What
What?
the hell?" Yeah. So I like that he was on it. So Trump's speech, he got booed a lot, uh, which was actually refreshing, not because I wanted to see him booed, but because it was actually nice to see Trump address a hostile audience because he does so many rallies where everybody's just praising him
Hmm.
that I wanted to see how he reacted to the hostile audience. And he did okay, but his message was let's make a deal, which you should expect. It was, hey, vote for me or nominate me as your candidate or whatever, and I will put people from this room in my cabinet. That was what he came out and said. And he said, but he was very in your face about it. Like, okay, so you're going to shoot for another 3%? Is that your goal? You shooting for 3%, or do you want actual pieces in the machine?
Hmm.
And there are people in this room I would do that with. So vote for me. And
Well, which is a he could have made that a better sales pitch because that actually does matter because if Trump was on the ballot both as the Republican and the Libertarian candidate, I would seriously think about voting for him, but checking the Libertarian Party box
mhm,
to say, all right, look, I'll go for this guy because he's the least bad option. But really, what I'm saying is, sit on and spin GOP.
mhm. RFK's speech was, like I said, one of the best speeches he's made. I think he blew away the audience because they they would cheer at points, and there were times when you could tell libertarian. I saw a post on Twitter after Trump's speech that was like, "Oh, this was like the most disrespectful audience you could have," blah blah blah. But at least you got to chant "and the Fed," and that's all libertarians live for is chanting "live in the Fed." And you could tell there were moments in the speech where they wanted to chant some random libertarian thing, hive mind, and they were like, "No, this is actually good." Okay, yeah, okay, we'll yeah, keep going. And it was a really good speech on what the Bill of Rights actually means and why it's so important. And it was one of those that you want to put a little music behind with a waving flag on, PBS at 9 o'clock in the morning on a Sunday,
Mm-hmm.
So it was a really good speech. Vivek's speech was good. It was the same as Trump's, the same message, but it was extending a hand instead of challenging. So he was out there saying, "We want to partner with you. We want I believe in this and this and this and this in your message.
Mm-hmm.
And we want that to be part of our administration. Come be part of it with us." And so that was his message. And then his debate with Clint Russell, with Dave Smith as the moderator, was a lot of the same. Clint actually came at him on certain things, but he always had a very respectful answer, and he would even look at him and say, "This is one of the things we disagree on, and this is
Mm-hmm.
why I believe what I believe, and I understand this is why you believe what you believe." And it was a very good conversation. Now, on Timcast, RFK did a full hour and a half. Trump came on and it was like a mainstream media interview. It was very curated. I think the questions were probably pre-approved because he had a campaign pitch answer to every one of them.
Yeah.
Uh, but they challenged RFK, and I think I texted you. He's winning me because he fights like I do. You don't check the leg kick, you lean in. And one of the questions at him was something to the effect of, uh, a lot of your positions changed during COVID. How can we trust you otherwise? And his answer back was, why wouldn't your position change during COVID? Because so much was exposed.
Mm-hmm.
If your position didn't change during COVID, were you even there? And I was
Well,
like,
even before COVID, that's where the shift for a lot of people on the left started to happen with the TDS of guys, you're going way too far. You're lunatics, man.
mm-hmm,
This is in the name of opposing this one guy, you're embracing every authoritarian thing that we have claimed for years we oppose.
mm-hmm. Well, and it was part of his message during his speech, RFK's, to be specific. He was talking, he knew the crowd he was talking to, and he's like, we don't agree on everything, but I guarantee you, everybody in this room was ahead of the curve on all the things that happened during COVID.
Hmm. Hmm.
And he said, admittedly, I was one of those people that had to see it happen to truly believe that these people would go that far.
Yeah.
But now I truly believe, and I think we're all in the same boat now. And that to me was a compelling message.
Well, and that's why what the Libertarian Party ultimately voted for was so disappointing. But the entire
Yeah, because
preamble to this
he seems to
conversation,
be the most woke of.
the entire preamble getting up to this was me pointing out how it wasn't surprising.
Mm-hmm.
because the people who go to the Libertarian Party convention have gotten means and ends confused. And so they are obsessed with this ideal, and they are failing to recognize. I've used this example before of Penn Jillette talking with Glenn Beck and saying, dude, you know, the you know, me debating you, the conservative talk show host ultra Mormon, about legalizing prostitution and drugs is a thought exercise, because we're not even close to that. Maybe, and he was saying this like 10, 15 years ago. Maybe if we start right now, our grandchildren can have this debate.
Which is funny because this was part of the Vivek debate with the VP candidate. Is they asked Vivek's stance on legalizing drugs and fentanyl and all these things, and Vivek's answer was something to the extent of, uh, "For your health, we should have right to try." Uh, and but we're fighting a different battle because on the street, you're not you don't have the same contract when a drug dealer gives you ecstasy that's laced with fentanyl because you didn't know the fentanyl was there.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas if you go to your doctor and they say we should use fentanyl to do this, which we do, it's an anesthetic.
Mm-hmm.
If fentanyl is used in medicine.
I've had it before, yeah.
Yeah. So we do this under the care of a professional. You have a different result than if you have something laced with it of this substance that a very tiny, tiny, tiny amount will kill you. And you think you're having fun and you're doing a drug, recreational drug like ecstasy, that doesn't allow you to feel the danger and you die.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a difference between those two things, and that was Vivek's point. And the other guy was just like, no, legalize everything. And it was like, no, I mean, there is the argument that if you legalize it, then there would be more professional oversight. But now, are you agreeing with these uh, uh, licensed agencies to oversee it? Because you also don't agree with that. So where's the give here? It's either completely unregulated, or in your view, or we'd allow doctors to regulate and deal with their
And,
clients.
and my response would have been to reject the premise.
And he
Is
did. That was his
Yeah,
response. Yeah,
is
yeah.
guys, why are we even talking about this? Look, we can't talk about legalizing drugs right now because we have a foreign entity, China, openly and brazenly shipping this stuff across our border illegally, knowing that it is killing our people. Can we do something about that first?
Yeah, and you just gave Vivek's response right there. And he said, but he had also the experience of talking about his own time dealing with regulatory bodies
Mm-hmm.
as a drug producer with his first company. So he was like, these are the problems with how it is done now. This is the problem with the way you want to do it.
Uh,
And
uh,
that
uh,
that was that was I personally think that was the best 45 minutes or so of the whole
mhm.
thing. I appreciated Trump's speech because it gave insight of his character when he's in a hostile area. I appreciated RFK's because he admittedly talked about his change over the last few years. And that's why he fits these things. And the things that people are afraid of the Kennedy name for should be
Mhm.
not
Mhm.
uh, kind of as big a boogeyman. But realistically, the star of the show was Vivek for me. He brought a message that was real like Trump, but in a way that you're like, oh, well, that wasn't a punch in the face to tell me I'm stupid. That's just a hey, let me help you up off the floor you just slipped on way of telling me I'm dumb.
It's why I hope he sticks around, and either, if Trump wins, gets into the administration, or if Trump doesn't win, I believe he's from Ohio,
He
isn't
is from
he? So
Ohio, yes, yeah.
that's a key Rust Belt swing state. If he ran
Not
for
not
governor
anymore
of
because
Ohio,
Biden's not on the ballot, remember?
that's a good point. But if he ran for governor of Ohio, that would be huge for what he could do for Ohio, but then big for him as a platform. to keep his message out there to show that he's more than just talking points. Because that, to me, that's my biggest hang up with Vivek
is the newness.
is the
The
newness. He doesn't. It's the
but the
same problem I
problem
had
is
with
with
Trump in
RFK.
2015.
The
It's he
same problem
doesn't
we
have a
have with
record.
RFK though, because we got his legal record.
Well, see, but I would submit that that is a record because he is on record for what he believes in because
Well,
he has fought for it in the legal
let
system.
me play all sides here then, because then I would say the same about Vivek because of his running of Strive and the way he handled that business from a political and
Mm-hmm.
a
Well,
business dealing.
and that's where I give him more credit than say where Trump was in 2015. And I'm going, guys, this guy has no political record. He just has talking points, but he has not demonstrated anything except in the business world. Vivek
Which
actually
is
put his money where
which
his
is
mouth was when he started to fight DEI.
yeah, which is where I've kind of fought with the people who were thinking everything is going to be peachy keen with Trump was I was like, listen to him in interviews about business in 1990. That's what you're going to get.
Mm-hmm.
And it's exactly what we got,
Mm-hmm.
where he was kind of jaded in a realistic way. I understand why he was jaded because being Mr. Nice Guy not only didn't get him nowhere, it got him negative. And so everybody's like, "Oh, all the things you hate about him." I'm like, that's because when he tried to do it the right way, he got punished.
Yeah.
And now he's doing it the way you hate, but he's getting it done. So it's maybe the issue here is us. We need to start celebrating the people who do it the right way with enough fervor that it encourage other people to do it the right way.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's where we have a chance with someone new coming in like RFK or Vivek.
Well, that's a I don't know how much more you had, but that's a to me that's a great point to wrap up because
Because with something positive.
and for we have frequently ranted about the local pay attention to the city council and the school board elections and the sheriff election and stop obsessing over the federal because you can have real impact on those local elections because they're smaller
In some
um,
places.
in some places.
Yeah, this is my frustration here because everything is like a high school popularity contest here.
Mm-hmm.
And how long you've lived in this town is basically what determines if you get elected.
That's one of the things that's different about where I'm at is because this area has grown so much so fast. There can't be a good old boy system because
Mm,
everybody's new, just about. But whereas Friendswood is a much more established suburb that's
hmm
been what it is for longer.
Yeah, I mean, even with my clients, the ones I love to death, they're like, "Oh, well, so and so went to high school here and did this, and oh, I trust them because they're from here." You hear that a lot. I trust them
Mhm.
because they're from here, and I'm like,
No, you should
no,
trust
you
them
should
because
trust them
you
because they
know
did
them
good
and their
things.
record. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. It's well they have a record of doing this and that, so I trust them. Okay. That is something substantive,
hmm
and that is where I was ranting earlier about being on cruise control and taking our citizenship for granted. And and I did have one thing I wanted to share that's pretty damn depressing, but it doesn't have to be. Of here we go. Um, this is a
hmm
recent poll
Yeah,
contrasting
I did
Zoomers and
just see this not
Boomers,
that long ago. Yeah.
and this is uh so the top there. These responses are very important. Okay, patriotism 76% to 32%. Belief in God and religion 65% to 26%. Having children 52% to 23%. That is that is civilizational collapse levels of numbers. You,
Yeah,
you
the only one I'll say is a little concerning on there having children
mhm.
because 26 is kind of an early cutoff there.
Yeah.
Because I'd say 35 if we're seeing the same number. But yeah, other than that, this is my problem because we just debated values and religion. you could put me down for patriotism, but you don't put me down for religion because I'm not religious. So there could be something there, but one of them should be up.
Hmm.
And realistically, from our conversation, it should be more than belief in God and religion should be up, because you can be
Hmm.
frustrated with your country and still have a religious view. So it's, I don't know.
But here's how, I try not to make that so depressing is there is still time because again, that was what they're calling Gen Z is 18 to 26.
Mhm.
That's who they polled is 18 to 26-year-olds. They're not a lost cause.
No, they're not.
But I think the way you reach though that group of people and especially the ones that are still under 18, but even more important is one of the things we ranted about with the sudden shift in the was it an Atlantic article that we looked at of yeah, mistakes were made during the
Yeah, yeah,
COVID response.
Atlantic,
Let's
yeah.
let's all just
The
move on.
amnesty article,
No,
yeah.
no, 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 no. If we are going to move on, as you say, just for the sake of argument, first there needs to be an admission of guilt, an admission
Well,
of, oh, we screwed up here.
and here's another one where I hate top-down solutions, but some places are doing this now. You're seeing more and more and more universities getting rid of their DEI departments. UNC just banned it. All of the Texas schools are banning them. Uh, and in Texas, it's actually a top-down thing because it was by governor decree,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
This is this is where the that age 18 to 26 is so important, because it's the most you're so you absorb these things. You want to make That's why they go to the colleges. That's why they go to the schools. The Marxists go to the schools because they know they have somebody who is going to not only listen to what they're saying, but be at an age where they're trying to impress their professors, trying to impress their peers. So they're not only going to listen, but they're going to do it with fervor. Now, if we reverse that a little bit with that age group, you can have a quick swing, because you're going to have
Yes.
people not only listening, but listening with that that wanting to be socially accepted mindset that is 18 to 26 years old. You are trying to find your place in society at that age. That is one of the disconnects here when they're just eating Cheetos in the basement, is they're not finding a place in society. And so now that we're having this swing at this developmental age, you can see those numbers completely flip in the next few
Yes.
years.
That is a better way of making the point that I was trying to make, which is if you just look at the numbers, that's depressing and we're doomed. But it also means that if we change those numbers, but we don't change those numbers without explaining and teaching, which is what this has all been about.
Well,
Why
I'll
is
add one to it
patriotism
too.
important? Why is religion important? Why is family important? Why should you care about these things?
I'll add one thing to it. You also don't change those numbers when the leadership that we have is so depressing. The Nancy
Yeah,
Pelosi's, the Mitch
yeah.
McConnell's, the Chuck Schumer's, the uh, uh, what's the guy who ran for president? Milk toast guy, Mormon. Romney, the
Yeah,
Romneys of
yeah, yeah, yeah.
the Liz Cheneys, you don't change those are the people that are responsible for those numbers.
These people aren't just
It's
not
it's
inspirational,
it's
they're not likable.
it's not lack
Yeah,
of
yeah.
it's not lack of values and stuff that causes that they have something to do with it, but it's the fact that when you're trying to convince somebody, in your case, what your case for today was, explain to somebody why they should have values, the example they have, it's not good. I mean,
Hmm.
we Biden was going to save us from Trump, but who respects Biden? Who wants to base their values on that leadership?
Hmm.
Same with Hillary Clinton. Who wants to place their values on that leadership? Uh, I name your Republican candidate. I already named the turtle and everybody else. So the other good news is they're all going to die here soon, and the next crop are people like Rand Paul. and Fetterman. And I was heard to someone told me to look up Torres, who's on the Democrat side, and they say that person, something Torres is doing really good stuff too. So I'm gonna have to expand out there because if that's starting to pop up in the uniparty of uniparties, which is the Democratic Party, there's hope there too. AOC might lose her district because she's in the Bronx. And look at what showed up to Trump's rally there. Just the people that showed up to Trump's rally, if they voted, if only those people voted in her election, New York might not go to Trump, but she loses
Hmm.
because just the sheer numbers that showed up to his rally was enough for her to lose. So there's hope there. There's hope in a lot of this. The second crop of these people coming up is not bad. Massey, that's another great one. Yeah.
Well, speaking of hope, do we have any hope for Friday? I don't remember where we left off. So
We did two Matt chapters.
are they are they bad chapters or good chapters coming up? I can't remember.
Oh, you're, let's
But
see.
so we will see y'all Friday for more Wheel of Time ramblings and
We
hopefully
got
get through
white
another
power
good chunk.
stuff, but it's
Okay.
naive, so that should be good. We got some Gallad and Perrin.
Yeah, the
Oh yeah, we
Gallon
got the
Paris
trial.
ones.
I guess we got to get through the trial
Yeah,
at least,
yeah.
and then
That
Elaine after that. Fuck. Let's at least get
yeah.
through the trial. You said we might be able to finish in two sessions.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. Looking at if we're able to make the progress we were making before our abbreviated session there that actually turned out to be pretty long, that we might be able to get through it in two. So we'll see how far we get Friday.
Yeah. Well, and as annoying as I thought the Tim Pool interview with Trump was, you got to give him credit. Tim Pool just did what Rogan didn't even do. He's the first
Yeah,
independent media outlet that is podcast format to get a former president on, a
that's a good point.
presidential candidate that's polling at 30% in RFK on. The only if he pulls off getting Biden on, he's pulled the hat trick. So give the guy credit. I've been getting annoyed with him a lot lately, but businessman he is.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
I'm
Yeah.
actually curious now that step has been taken if Rogan doesn't get like an exclusive interview uh with someone like Trump or whatever. Or if Biden gets desperate and reaches out. It's like,
Hmm.
"Oh, he was on Pool, but I can get on Rogan."
Yeah. That would be interesting because I can't see Biden being able to sustain a long form interview.
Or but also that they could do something like send out Kamala.
Hmm.
They could
Oh,
say,
that would be
"Okay,
hilarious. I
it
would
would
love to
be."
see Rogan interview Kamala.
Well, we've actually entered a really weird time because did you see the Pelosi versus can't remember his name. He was a band member of Mumford and Sons, and they
No,
debated in front of Parliament
I had not seen that.
on populism versus the central elite kind of thing. And Pelosi was making her case of how populism is going to destroy democracy. And I'm like, this guy that was kicked out of his band for his political views is debating the former Speaker of the House. I mean, things are changing, man, and it's kind of crazy for good or
Well,
bad.
hopefully for good. All right. Well, with that, we will see y'all next time.
All right, later, guys.